Yeah, and so we can start with the roll call.
Okay. Committee Member Fasoon? Here. Committee Member Hodges?
Here.
Committee Member Lieberman?
Here.
Vice Chair Melgen?
Here.
Committee Member Vahil McClanahan?
Here.
Chair Mohammed?
Here.
And Committee Member Larson will not be able to make it this evening.
Okay, now we can move on to the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to these indigenous peoples, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. We can now move on to the approval of minutes.
Any comments, questions, or edits to the minutes?
A question.
Mm-hmm.
When we receive the part in the minutes where it says provided feedback, whether that's committee members or public comment, is the content of that feedback captured somewhere else?
It's captured on YouTube in the video recording, but as a committee, our minutes are supposed to be action minutes, so they really only record motions, action taken by the committee, who was present. It doesn't, they don't reflect the content of what was discussed, but we have those YouTube videos forever available online if anyone were to want to go back and watch.
So then in your work for the city, is that how you, if you wanted to know what was the comment provided at that time, that's how you would go back and?
I take notes, but so as staff, we take notes. And if we want to clarify, we'll watch the YouTube again. We very rarely refer back to the committee minutes for content reminders.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Appreciate it.
Okay, any other questions, edits, comments? Okay, if there are none, I would look favorably upon a motion to roll call.
First, we'll need a motion to approve.
Oh yeah, motion to approve.
I'm happy to make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay. Okay. Committee Member Fasoon? Yes. Committee Member Hodges?
Yes.
Committee Member Lieberman?
Yes.
Vice Chair Melgen? Committee Member Vahil McClanahan?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes.
Great. Minutes approved. And apologies to Committee Member Vahil McClanahan and Committee Member Melgen. I think your names are swapped, but you're welcome to remain in your seats if you'd like.
Okay, and then I believe we can move on to public comment.
Yes.
And any public members wanting to speak on an item not on the agenda.
We have no members of the public present.
Okay. I guess we can move on to item 4, which is announcements.
Yes. I only have a couple announcements this evening. Well, Michelle, would you like to make a reminder announcement about the compost hub?
Yes, just a reminder that the compost hub at the Giltrakt Farm is open every Sunday from 12 to 4. It's located just at the entrance of the Giltrakt Farm on San Pablo Avenue here, and it offers free compost to all members of the public, Albany residents and otherwise. And we've already gotten over 60 participants taking compost, so it's been very successful. We've had 40 cubic yards of compost dropped off so far over the last couple of months there. So quite a success as of yet.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. The one other announcement we wanted to share with the committee is the results of the city's street tree inventory are now live in the form of a community viewer. The community viewer shows you where the trees are located, what the trees look like. a general overview of our street tree canopy, and you can access that by going to www.albanyca.org/sustainability. And then that takes you to a sidebar, and if you click Sustainability Events and Resources, scroll down to Adaptation and Urban Greening, you'll see Street Tree Inventory Community Viewer. And that will allow you to see our street tree inventory. I cannot answer any specific questions about it because I don't know how to answer them, but I encourage you to explore the community viewer and take a look at what our consultants found. Any questions? Seeing none, you do have one member of the public, so you may want to open it up to
Yeah.
public comment on announcements.
Yes, let's open it up.
Are there any members of the public who would like to make public comment on the announcements section of the agenda? If so, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised.
Okay, we can move on to discussion of announcements.
Great. Our first agenda item is item 6-1, proposed amendments to the general plan and zoning ordinance modifying off-street parking requirements. We are joined this evening by Jeff Bond, Community Development Director.
Good evening, everybody. I don't think I've met.
I want to make sure your mic is on.
The green light is on. Is it working?
Now we can.
Okay. It's always weird talking really close to these things. I'm sorry. I've been doing this a long time, but still, the microphone on my face is weird. My name is Jeff Bond. I'm the director of the Community Development Department. Sorry I haven't gotten a chance to meet most of you personally, but I hope to be able to do that over time. And tell you a little bit more about the whole wide range of things that we do in the Community Development Department. But that's not on the agenda tonight, so I'll stick to what's on the agenda. What I'd like to do is give you a presentation, a brief presentation on some work that the Planning and Zoning Commission has been working on over the last few months about parking requirements in the city. I think this is an exciting step in the implementation of some of the climate action measures that are in our climate action plan. And then if you would take an action, consider taking an action to the City Council, recommending to the City Council action on this. We're scheduled to present this to the City Council at their meeting on July 17th. So to give you a little context, if you could, thank you. This started, well, we've been talking about modifying the city's parking requirements for a few years now. The city voters, it used to be up until 2016, the city of Albany had pretty stringent minimum parking requirements. We were basically requiring people to put in more parking than we needed. And that was because of a measure the voters in the 70s approved, and it wasn't easy to change that. In 2016, the voters in Albany passed a measure that allowed the City Council to make some adjustments to that without having to go back to the voters for every last word. Council promptly made some modifications to that, and it was an important step towards kind of modernizing what we're doing and reducing the amount of parking in the city, which is expected to reduce ultimately the number of vehicles and vehicle miles traveled and so forth that are part of our climate action goals. The next big thing that happened was last year in the state legislature. Assembly Bill 2097 was passed by the state legislature and signed by the governor. Next slide, please, Michelle. And this bill is pretty simple and straightforward. It says that cities in California cannot require parking if the location is within a half a mile of a major public transit stop. There are a few exceptions, none of them which really apply to Albany. So the question is, what is the definition of a major transit stop? Next slide, please. And that's shown on this screen. The BART station El Cerrito Plaza is a major transit stop. Makes sense. There's part of the city that is within that half-mile radius from El Cerrito Plaza BART. And the two big intersections of transit lines in Albany also constitute a major transit stop at Solano and San Pablo, where the 18 and the 72s cross paths. It takes two lines with 15-minute headways to constitute a major transit stop. And the second is at San Pablo and Monroe, just right over here, where the 52 and the 72 cross paths. So as you can see from this, as it stands today under state law, everything in that kind of shaded yellowish color, I guess it is, right now we cannot under state law require parking requirements. So this whole process began by saying, well, that covers probably 75% of the city. We should extend that just citywide so there aren't two different standards. You could be on the edge of that and your neighbor next door across the street or something could have one requirement and you have a different one, and that just doesn't make any sense. And we've already encountered a few of those incidents that it doesn't make any sense. So with this legislation, we started by talking about this, just applying this legislation statewide. Planning and Zoning Commission looked at it and said, there's more that we can do here. So I'm going to go into a little bit more of those details. You can skip over the next slide. I meant to delete it, but it snuck in, so thank you. So we're doing two things when we're changing the codes in California. We have our general plan, which is kind of the big picture that sometimes is referred to as the constitution of land use in a city. And so before we change the details of the zoning ordinance, we have to change the general plan. And you've seen, I think, in the packet of materials for you this evening, some of the edits that we want to make to the general plan to bring it up to date to what we're doing with the zoning ordinance. And that's pretty straightforward. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about that, but I'm not going to dwell on that too much. The next step, next slide, is the details of the zoning ordinance. And this too is in the materials that were provided for you. And this is kind of the gory details of what we use on a day-to-day basis to do planning, review applications. Planning and Zoning Commission works with the zoning ordinance all the time. And we did quite a bit of editing to this to bring it into kind of the 2020s, if you will. Make it consistent with state law and go a little bit further. So what the zoning ordinance does, it kind of flips the story. It used to be that planners would say you have to have parking. You can have as much as you want. You can build as much as you want, but you have to at least have a minimum number of parking spaces. And today we're flipping that and saying, we don't want you to have any parking spaces, but if you want them, you can have them, but up to a certain maximum. So rather than that minimum, we have a maximum. That's the big change. There are some technical things about the way we organize our zoning ordinance that we're cleaning up. There's a lot of that different zoning districts, different requirements. And the only one that's kind of worth mentioning, because sometimes it will come up in conversations, is the zoning requirements out on the waterfront at Golden Gate Fields are a completely separate thing. And so we're not touching those today. There's really nothing going on at Golden Gate Fields right now. There are no big development proposals or anything anyhow, so we're not missing any opportunities. That's another place where we have to go back to the voters to get permission to change a word in our zoning ordinance about the waterfront. One of the realities of what we have been doing over the years that I think this is kind of coming clean on a little bit is, and oftentimes when people are particularly doing home additions, we used to require parking spaces, but they wouldn't fit in. And we all knew it. It's just a small lot, big house, it doesn't fit. And so we would waive the parking requirement, but we'd charge them a fee for that, a couple $1,000. And could be up to a couple $1,000. And one of the things we're doing is just getting rid of that. So you don't have to provide the parking, and even better, you don't have to pay us. Again, I won't go into the details of the zoning ordinance here today, but if you would like to talk about it, I'm happy to do that. Next slide, please, Michelle. There are a couple of other things that we're doing in these changes. We wanted to not only discourage extra parking, but in fact kind of regulate the amount of concrete that somebody could create and create a bigger driveway. So we really want people not to have more than 2 off-street parking spaces. Most households, I think, in Albany have 1 or 2 cars. There are occasionally a few people with 3 or 4. That's the kind of thing that we really don't want to see, paved front yards full of cars. We also we've created a process, we call it a use permit process, so that if there is a unique situation, maybe it's an extended household with 2 or 3 different generations and there are extra cars, or whatever the unique situation is, we do have a permit process to get an exception so that we can deal with those situations. Another thing that we had in certain areas of the city, and we're expanding it citywide, is the idea of unbundling your parking space from your rental apartment. So if you rent an apartment, in the past, you had an assigned parking space, whether you needed it or not, and whether you wanted it or not, and you were essentially part of your rent, you were paying for that. And we're trying to separate those two. So if you rent an apartment and you want a parking space, that's a separate part of your lease. It's unbundled. But if you don't need it, if you're a transit user, or you don't mind parking on the street someplace and just figuring it out. I have a 26-year-old son. That's what he does. He, walks a couple blocks. It's not a big deal. That's for some people, maybe not for other people. But anyhow, the idea of unbundling that so that we're not building more parking than people are using. There was a survey done in Berkeley a few years ago, and I'm forgetting the numbers, but they looked at new apartment buildings and the actual usage of the parking spaces that were required by the city. And it looked at, the conclusion they reached was the cities are basically requiring more parking than is being used. And that's pointless, of course. It adds the expense to the construction. It's just not that's the last thing you really want to have spend money on. A couple of other things that we're doing that we think are kind of works in progress, but I think are important. This requiring TDM. TDM is an acronym for Transportation Demand Management. Sorry, I don't say that out loud very often. And this is essentially mechanisms to give people alternatives to using their car. And the simplest example is Clipper cards or the AC Transit. I think they call it the Flex Pass or the Fast Pass or something like that, to give people alternatives to driving their vehicle with 1 or 2 people in it. Bigger cities have things like in Emeryville, Emery Go Round. Some large institutional companies have buses or vans or something that they can help with. Those are good solutions in other places, not so practical here, except for maybe something like the USDA facility, but we can't really control what they do. Anyhow, we're going to require, as new projects come in the city, to have them, at the very least, provide a Clipper card to residents so that it just makes it all the more seamless to, I'm going to the city, I'm just going to grab my Clipper card and take part, not hassle. It's going to save the time and money, and the card's sitting right there. And finally, another little thing that is annoying to people sometimes that are they're renting a building, a commercial building. There are different parking requirements for different uses, and sometimes you could be in an existing building and we would require more parking even though there's nothing changing with the building other than it's going from an office to a restaurant or something like that. So we're eliminating that. If there's an existing building, the parking is whatever the parking is. There's no magical way to create more. So we're eliminating that requirement for either finding more parking someplace or, again, paying us a fee for us to tell you it's okay. Next slide, please. So this gets to the heart of it, and I'm getting close to the end here. These are the parking requirements that we're going to be introducing to the City Council for their consideration. And I won't read this whole table, but basically the highlights are for a single-family home, you can have the maximum of 2 off-street parking spaces. And if you don't want to provide any, that's just fine with us. The third one down, the multifamily dwelling, That is half a parking space per unit, so every other unit will have a parking space. If you're within a half a mile of BART, and then, actually, yes, that's correct. And then one space per unit in other locations. Those are the two applications we'll probably see the most of. These others are in our zoning code. We don't see a lot of them. And so those requirements, I won't go through at all, but the big ones are the single-family homes and the multi-family homes. Next slide, please. And then these are would be the new requirements for non-residential uses if there was to be new construction, which is not going to happen very often in Albany, but if there was, you don't have to provide any parking for anything. But if you do, these are the maximums. So we don't want to see basically big parking lots that aren't being used. And restaurants and other commercial uses are the kinds of things we're going to get the most of. Industrial uses and the other public and quasi-public uses very rarely happen. Next slide, please. All this sounds like it's a big deal, but actually, I think at the end of the day, it's not going to dramatically change how the city feels and functions. We don't get a lot of big new development in Albany, so all these changes are going to be very incremental. One thing it will do is make our lives a little bit easier at the city staff level and for our applicants, just less red tape. For those projects that are building new housing, it will, if the developer wishes to provide less parking, it will reduce their costs, which should correspondingly increase the affordability of their project. And then the big thing is it's supporting multimodal transportation and hopefully implementing the climate action plan objectives. Even though there are a lot of good things about this, we don't want to ignore the fact that there are some downsides to this, at least perception for some people. There is going to be less parking. So that is, for some people, parking is very important to some people. And so we have to acknowledge that some people are concerned about this. It will create spillover parking. So if you, as an example, live close to Solano Avenue, you may begin to notice over time that there's more people parking in front of your home and walking to Solano Avenue. I think in general, I think the sense I get from the community is that's just fine. But again, some people are feel very strongly about who parks in front of their home, and that's can be an uncomfortable thing. It will push us towards a couple of things that we've talked about in the past. One is to start to think about managing our on-street parking. So in other cities, you see parking meters or residential parking stickers are required to help kind of manage who's parking there and sort of price the parking, which is something that is considered kind of a progressive way of managing the public right-of-way. So this will push us towards that a little bit more quickly. It will also push us towards doing more enforcement. We have a couple of people who do parking enforcement, but their hours are limited. And as we do these kinds of parking management measures, we need more people to write parking tickets, for better or worse. And then lastly, it's hardly a big deal, but we will lose in our department a little bit of money from the fees. It's not the end of the world for us. Almost to the end, so bear with me here a moment. I want to just, next slide, please, Michelle. I want to acknowledge that some of the comments that we've gotten to date, I think there's generally support so far for doing this. The Planning Commission voted unanimously to endorse this. We'll be going to the Transportation Commission tomorrow night, by the way. But there have been concerns. I mentioned the spillover parking, the impact on businesses, some business people who really rely on customers to use their automobile. Flowerland is a good example. You go there, you're probably buying something big and heavy. It's hard to put it on your bike or carry it far. There's support for the equity that comes with kind of making sure that we're applying the rules equally throughout the city. And then, as I mentioned, the Transportation Commission's also been asked to look at it, and we're going to have to kind of think through some of the EV parking and ADA parking. As we require less parking in general, that means if we do kind of the traditional way of figuring out how much EV parking or how much accessibility parking, it's usually a percentage of the total. So if we used to require, 10 parking spaces, we'd have one ADA space. Now, if it declines, those percentages change a little bit. So we just have to think through that a little bit. It's not our intention to make it more difficult to charge your car or park if you have accessibility needs. Next slide, please. Real quickly on this one, I mentioned we're not touching the waterfront district. We'll come back to that some years from now. In the more near future, we will come back and look at bike parking. There's been expression of interest in talking about looking at our bike parking requirements and updating those. They're pretty good now, but they can be better. We wanted to separate that out just because that's sort of a different, and self-contained piece of research for us, and we'll probably be working on that, I would hope, in the next few months. So again, to wrap this up, we're asking the committee to consider making a recommendation to the City Council, and be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Any questions?
Really appreciated that presentation, and I'm wondering if Albany is following the path that other cities are taking in terms of applying this requirement citywide. Is that unusual, or is that common for other cities in the East Bay in California?
It's I think we're not absolutely in the front. There are a few cities a little bit ahead of us, even for that matter, the state legislature got a little bit ahead of us. But I think we're ahead of most cities. I think Berkeley has passed some of these measures in at least some areas. I don't track super closely what they're doing. I know some of the bigger cities are doing that as well, San Jose and San Francisco. But I think I think we're moving relatively fast certainly compared to suburban cities where this is a little bit more of a hot topic than it is in Albany.
Thanks, Jeff. That was great. Let's see. I had a few specific questions. On the transit pass one, is the requirement just going to be like the Clipper card itself?
Well, no. We had a conversation about this with the Planning and Zoning Commission the other night about what the dollar amount that's going to get loaded into it automatically. And we're going to work on that a little bit. We didn't want to put the dollar amount in the ordinance because then it's hassle to change it as transit fares change. But our thought is hopefully, and I think the AC Transit Pass is around $30 or $40, so maybe we would match that. It would be something that hopefully gets used. We don't want the money to just sit in a Clipper card and not get used. That's not doing anybody any good, but it's enough to get people, to work and back for a reasonable commute. And so anyhow, the Planning and Zoning Commission is going to take that up over the coming months to figure out what that dollar amount is. And I'm happy to come back again to share that with you when the time comes.
Okay, great. And that was that for multi-unit dwellings or all new residents?
That's intended for multifamily dwellings and businesses. It's a little bit more challenge. It's kind of easier to say to a developer of a project of a couple dozen units or a couple hundred units, hey, you've got to buy a bunch of these cards. It's a little harder and it's easier for us to track. It'll be harder for us to go from house to house to say, hey, how's that Clipper card doing? We're probably not going to actually do that, so we didn't want to put that in as a requirement.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And then I just had one question on process. So it sounded like there'd been a resolution at the City Council, and then I guess would this Transportation Commission review be happening in parallel?
It's happening tomorrow night.
Oh, okay, great.
They're meeting tomorrow night, so this exact same agenda item is on their agenda as well.
Okay, great.
So the action for the committee tonight here is just to make a motion to recommend,
Okay, great.
if that's what you so choose.
Okay, I think we can move on to public comment. Oh, actually, yeah, go
Can I
ahead.
just ask one more question? I'm just always curious, would we be the first city to apply the state requirement citywide? Or are there other cities that are applying that requirement citywide that you're aware of?
I don't know for sure. I bet we're in the top tier of cities doing it, but there are so many cities in California. There are 100 jurisdictions in the Bay Area. I don't follow it that closely. Nobody, to my knowledge, nobody is following it that closely.
Okay.
But I would guess that we're probably near the top.
Okay. I like superlatives. So if we're the first, I think we should claim that flag if it happens.
All right, any other questions? If not, I think we can move on to public comment for this item.
Okay. Nick Peterson?
Yeah, good evening, committee members, and that was an excellent presentation by Jeff Bond. Thank you, Jeff. This is really amazing that this is happening, and I think the state has done a very wise thing. As a representative of Albany Climate Action Coalition, I really encourage the Climate Action Committee to support this and send their recommendation to the City Council that they adopt these measures. I mean, this will support denser and more affordable housing and increase the dependence on public and active transportation, and will reduce the amount of cars in Albany. We have too many cars, they're all over the place. And this is one of the goals of the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. And as Jeff mentioned, it'll ease this in over a period of time. So we need to get these things in place so they start to have impact and effect. And I know people are really nervous about change, but these are the kind of changes we need to make, and we need to make our public transportation something that people rely on more and is more robust and is used more. So certainly recommend that you guys make a motion to recommend this to the City Council. Thank you very much.
If anyone else would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature on Zoom. No other hands raised.
I think we can move on to discussion and possible action. Yeah.
I guess I'll start by saying, thanks again, Jeff. I remember this issue coming up years and years ago when I was previously on the Sustainability Committee, and people in the group scratching their heads about how we might be able to change parking requirements. So it's really exciting for me to see this move forward, and that you're thinking so creatively about how to improve things when it comes to parking in Albany. Not just adopting the state requirement, but going beyond it. So I think that's fantastic.
Are there any motions or anything?
Second that motion.
Okay. Committee Member Fasoon?
Yes.
Committee Member Hodges?
Strong yes.
Committee Member Lieberman?
Yes.
Vice Chair Melgen?
Yes.
Committee Member Vahil McClanahan?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes.
Great. That was quick. right.
I think we can move on to item 6-2.
Yes, 6-2, this is in response to a request from the committee for an update on actions the city has taken and is taking to increase access to electric vehicle charging in the city in response to actions listed in our climate action and adaptation plan, as well as council priorities. Give me one moment to share my screen. For some reason, Zoom always wants me to reload. Great. Okay. So first, I wanted to bring to everyone's attention, the City Council recently went through a strategic planning process at the council level, and one of the actions they include under Goal 1 of their strategic plan was to advance climate action and adaptation, and there were 3 objectives listed under that main goal, and the second one is most relevant to this presentation today, and that is explore opportunities to facilitate electric vehicle charging. Then the city's climate action and adaptation plan was adopted by City Council in 2019. And based on a review, there are 5 actions directly tied to electric vehicles or electric mobility in the transportation section of the climate action and adaptation plan. And before I dive into those, I'll first direct your attention to the right, where we have goals and then 2045 targets. It might be hard to see on the screen with this lighting, but I'll read them. The first goal is to decrease passenger vehicle miles traveled through use of alternative modes, and the 2045 target is 25% reduction in passenger vehicle miles traveled by 2045. Thank you, Jeff. The second goal is to transition passenger vehicles to zero-emission alternatives, the 2045 target. There are 2. 98% of passenger vehicles are electric, and 90% of commercial vehicles are electric. So those are the goals and the actions listed in the council-adopted CAP. I won't read all the text on this slide. But the first was 1.1.6. Work with third-party programs to provide shared electric mobility options. We, based on the last CAP update process we gave to the CAC, we listed that item as in progress, as we now have VO operating in the city under, is it still technically temporary? Okay, under a not for long temporary operating agreement. And City Council adopted a micromobility ordinance in June, setting permit requirements for micromobility. CAP Action 1.2.1, create an electric vehicle action plan. The Climate Action Committee actually discussed this action at length and determined that rather than undergoing an entire planning process for an EV plan, a electric vehicle subcommittee would be formed to determine priorities for advancing the goals listed under CAP Action 1.2.1. And the outcome of that was the subcommittee developed the multifamily electric vehicle pilot program that has been very successful in the city, and we'll give some more details about that later. CAP Action 1.2.2, adopt an electric vehicle readiness ordinance that would increase the charging requirements for new construction renovations completed for both new construction and renovations. We have updated code requirements that are more stringent than the state standards. Action 1.2.3, not yet started because we don't necessarily know the best route to go about to achieve this, but that's work with gas stations to create the fueling stations of the future. And then CAP Action 1.2.4, increase adoption of electric vehicles and motorized equipment. We listed that as in progress as we continue to promote incentives and rebates, as well as funding programs to increase adoptions of electric vehicles. So combining the City Council listed priorities and the priorities listed in the CAP, we see this as having one overarching goal related to electric vehicle charging, or EVs in general, and that is increase adoption of electric vehicles in Albany, and facilitate opportunities for charging. We see that there are 5 areas of opportunity for increasing charging access. There's at multifamily dwellings, single families, commercial lots, in the public right-of-way, and then city facilities. I'll dive into the opportunities, successes, and challenges of each area. For single family, the city's successes thus far have been, as I mentioned, that we have more stringent requirements under CalGreen that now require 220-volt outlets for home charging. And there's also been a state ruling that all cars purchased by 2030 must be all electric. The opportunities we see are increasing and continuing the outreach we're doing to residents about the benefits of EVs and helping them navigate the logistics of home charging. Another opportunity is the city could encourage individual households running conduit to the planting strip for charging access. Some challenges there with that, as we mentioned, the curbside charging. It's quite expensive, and it potentially has some issues with encroachment issues, some ADA concerns, because you have to be really careful that you're not blocking someone's ability to use the sidewalk. It's tricky because it's a private investment for public space, meaning that a homeowner could decide to invest in a charger for the curb and then be really frustrated that they're never able to park their car there. They wouldn't be able to reserve a spot in the public right-of-way. And this one, I apologize, it shouldn't be a sub-bullet to this, it's its own bullet. As a city, we can't mandate EV purchases prior to the state mandate, so we wouldn't be able to require that residents of single family buy EVs prior to 2030. For multifamily, some of our successes are the multifamily electric vehicle charging pilot program. To date, we've had 18 chargers installed at 3 multifamily dwelling units. We also, if you look to the right, this is the first page of the multifamily electric vehicle guide. So Michelle created a multifamily electric vehicle guide. These are tongue twisters. That was given to all tenants of the MFDs at which electric vehicle chargers were installed, encouraging them to go all electric, use the chargers, kind of debunking some of the myths and providing some information to help them convince them to go all electric. Another success is, again, that our city CalGreen standards are higher for electric vehicles than the state standard. Currently, we have 20% of total spots in a new multifamily must be for charging, so have chargers installed, and the rest must be EV ready. Opportunities we see are there's a potential for council to expand the multifamily EV charging pilot program and increase the funding. So right now it was limited to 3 multifamily dwellings, but they could increase that funding. That was funded by Measure DD. Some challenges. The requirements under CalGreen only apply to new development. We're unable to mandate those requirements for existing multifamilies. And the requirements for new development are a percentage of total vehicle parking spaces. State legislation and new city parking standards, as we just saw, might eliminate parking minimums, meaning that there would be fewer number of spaces total at MFDs, meaning that you can't mandate that a certain percentage, if there are none, be electric or for chargers. At commercial lots, our success is again, CalGreen. Thanks to the CAC for all the work you did on CalGreen. EV readiness is required for 20% of spaces, and chargers must be installed at 5% of spaces. Opportunities we see are providing information to property owners and managers, and we're excited to announce that staff is in the process of developing a resource guide for owners of commercial lots and businesses to provide them information on how they can get financial assistance, technical assistance for installing chargers in their lots that the city has no control over, but they could install chargers at. We hope to bring a draft of that to the CAC in July for feedback. And then back to that cap action 1.2.3, we could find opportunities to work with existing fueling locations, meaning gas stations, to increase charging capacity. To our knowledge, no one's done that yet, so we would have to look into the best way to do that, but it's definitely on our radar. Some of the challenges are, again, the requirements for EV charger installations apply to new development, not existing commercial spaces. And the city has no publicly owned commercial lots in which we could install chargers. Some cities have parking garages or commercial lots that they own, we don't. For the public right-of-way, because this is a tricky one and the concepts for approaching it are relatively new, we haven't determined any successes. Opportunities for the future are potential partnership with EBCE where possible. We've chatted with EBCE about a few opportunities. Unfortunately, none have panned out due to some of the challenges we've mentioned in this presentation, that Albany doesn't actually own a lot of the space that are prime for charger locations, and we have very narrow sidewalks, streets, and parking spaces. So nothing has panned out, but we have hope that maybe in the future we could find one. Another opportunity, I guess the way this is worded, the public right-of-way parking is an opportunity because it works for residences without on-site parking alternatives. Some of the challenges are that placement of the charger must avoid conflict with 4 common types of underground utility infrastructure, sidewalk conditions, street trees, utility poles, access to electrical service, etc. There are many other factors to consider when you're putting a charger in the public right-of-way. Again, if you put a charger in the public right-of-way, no one has exclusive rights or access to parking in that spot. So even if it's outside someone's home or outside someone's business, it doesn't mean that they can reserve that spot. As Jeff mentioned earlier, we have limited parking enforcement capability right now because we have a limited staff and they only work a certain number of hours. So we don't have an expanded parking enforcement program at this time. One of the other challenges that, depending on where you install a charger at the public right-of-way, you have to think about if someone could reach, if they have front of car charging versus back of car charging. If you're working with pull-in parking spots, that can be challenging. There's pressure on on-street parking, and then also one of the things the city wants to consider is where are we putting our dollars to increase electric mobility options rather than or where could we do it in a more equitable way than just putting a charger in front of one home or one business. For city facilities, I'm gonna take a pause and let you all look at this beautiful image on the right of a City of Albany-owned electric vehicle. This is our GEM that our Recreation and Community Services Department uses for city travel by staff. It is all electric, and it's fun to drive, I will tell you that. It does not go very fast, but it's great. Another success is the EBCE fleet study was completed, and while we haven't had an opportunity to implement that yet, it is on our radar for when cars are up for swap out. We have some information and analysis already completed. Also, our Public Works facility over on Cleveland has EV charging readiness for fleet vehicles and visitors. So we could put chargers there for both fleet and visitors at any moment. Opportunities, we're working with EBCE on a solar and storage project, and it's possible that we could include electrical capacity analysis at city facilities as a part of that, since they would have to do an analysis of electrical capacity for determining how many solar panels to put on the roof. It would also hopefully be possible to assess the capacity if we were to transition fleet vehicles or put in chargers. And then there is a council capital improvement plan discussion in the fall that the CAC could have an opportunity to weigh in on. Challenges, city facilities have limited parking spaces for fleet, staff, and visitors. I think we have less than 20 spots in our lot out here, and there's not a lot of space to put actual chargers. And it has been brought up by city staff that if we were to transition fleet vehicles to all electric, we would need dedicated charging stations. So it would require some restructuring of our current parking situation. And then there is a cost-benefit analysis that we have to do when determining if we're going to switch out a fleet vehicle. Take, for example, our building inspecting vehicle. It drives about 1,000 miles a year. And so we have an internal combustion engine car right now that's not driving very much. It could last us a lot longer, and we have to do a cost-benefit analysis and think of the embodied carbon of switching out an internal gas combustion engine car that isn't driving that much with an EV that would similarly not drive that much but would have to be brand new. So just a few considerations. So this is a second slide about successes, opportunities, and challenges for city facilities, but for public use. Some of the successes we mentioned again, there's charging readiness at the public works facility, so it's possible a charger could be put in for a visitor vehicle to use. Some opportunities are the solar and storage project electrical capacity analysis, also the council capital improvement plan discussion in the fall again. And challenges, there are accessibility laws that require the first space be designated for van accessible. So that's 17 feet wide by 18 feet long, which means we would have to dedicate a parking spot for that and then a parking spot for a charger. City facilities have limited parking spaces. And then again, there's the question of cost benefit compared to other form of EV incentive programs. Are we going to prioritize putting in chargers in our city facilities for visitors to use for 5-10 minutes while they're at City Hall renewing their passport, or are we going to funnel money into rebates and opportunities for electrification for individual households? I will stop there. That's my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
I had a question, the first bullet on slide 7, commercial lots. I just don't understand what it means. Cal Green EV readiness is required for 20% of the spaces, and chargers have to be there for 5% of the spaces. Could you explain what that means?
Are you asking about like what EV readiness means? Yes. Or, so yeah, EV readiness basically requires that the space has, built-in conduit and electrical capacity for a charger, but the actual charging unit isn't installed yet.
Okay, thank you.
I'm wondering what the ballpark cost, having installed the conduit, of adding a charger is.
I think it depends on a lot of factors, like if you have to restripe, if you have to move concrete, if you have to, I'm not a builder, but I imagine there's a lot of variable costs, but I would guess minimum a few thousand just for the physical charger itself.
Yeah, I'd say, and it depends on the kind of level of charging you're looking at too. If it's like a super fast charger versus what we call a level 2 charger, there's a pretty significant cost difference there. But, a fairly basic level 2 charger is at least several $1,000s, and then several $1,000s for labor, I think, at the very low end.
Wondering if you can pull up the slide that had the map of existing charging infrastructure. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, there were some that I didn't recognize, and it referenced that there were 9, and so I know where some of them are, but if you don't mind just sort of showing us where the locations are, that would be helpful. And if you can confirm that those are all public charging points.
2 of them are new. They're the ones that just, they were installed a little while ago, but just made live in the Sprouts parking lot.
Okay. Yeah,
I know that.
Mm-hmm. Here we go. I got this from I could also pull up the website. I got this from plugshare.com.
Okay.
Yeah, the one in gray is behind the post office.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some that are in that lot kind of underneath the highway.
Mm-hmm. So I know there are, I think, 3 under the highway, right? Is that correct? I'm
I believe
just sort of
so.
going off my head. Then there's 1 behind the post office, maybe 2, but I think 1,
2.
maybe 2. Okay, that gets us to 5. And there are 2 at the Sprouts. So I'm only at 7 now. I don't know where any other ones are. That's why I'm asking.
Let me look.
Okay.
Yes, it's counting. Maybe. I'm having a hard time understanding the PlugShare website.
It's all right. I mainly just didn't know if there were other ones
Right.
that staff or, members of the committee were aware of that I wasn't, because I try and track that stuff.
I think there are 4 under the highway.
Okay.
And then, yeah, it's possible it might be counting 1 from Whole Foods or something. It might be a GIS issue, but
Okay. But there
yeah,
is
there's no
another site- there's
locations
another
that you
site
haven't
that we're
mentioned,
missing.
yeah.
Okay. All right, that's great.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. First on the multi-family dwelling pilot, great to see that that's, doing very well. I was curious, for that one, are those all installed at existing multifamily homes?
Yeah, those are all at existing buildings.
Okay, and I can't remember if we covered this, but what's the, I guess cost share on that, and I guess ownership model of the chargers after they get built?
Yeah, so the cost share we did for that program was that the building owners paid 20% of the cost and the city paid 80%. And the chargers are owned by the building owners and are available for use by the tenants.
Okay, great. And I guess, is there recommendations in the works to expand that program?
Yeah, so right now the program is, we're kind of in the wrapping up stage. The chargers have recently been installed and we're sort of, working out all the kinks, getting tenants connected understanding how to work them and doing some kind of final interviews and reflections. And then I'll be putting together a report kind of summarizing all of the things we learned, and we'll be talking internally about some recommendations for further action and bring that back to the committee to discuss and bring something to council. So it'll be in the works in the next few months.
Okay, great. Let's see, and then I had another question around, kind of city-owned properties and places to put chargers. It was interesting to learn that Albany does not own any official parking lots. And I was curious on the kind of right-of-way side and potential for putting chargers there. I just wanted to confirm, it sound like with kind of talking with EBCE, you also had looked at potential places to put chargers kind of along, say, Solano or San Pablo?
We looked at charger locations on Solano, which is what everyone wants to see. And the feedback was that it was narrow sidewalk, so it would make it hard for folks to travel on the sidewalk. Because of the way the parking is angled, it made it hard to fit multiple chargers. I think there was one other factor that I'm forgetting for why it was passed.
Just, I think the general infrastructure there's a lot of infrastructure in that area, and so it might be difficult to avoid certain things and connect to electricity as needed. Potentially really expensive.
We looked into it, and it was just unfortunate, but not an opportunity right now, given the technology and the requirements of a charger.
Gotcha. Okay. I guess in that process, were there any right-of-ways that were deemed to be good candidates?
Not at this time. They were looking at major thoroughfares, so Solano and San Pablo. They weren't looking at any side streets because they're hoping to make it very accessible. So someone who was driving down could see the charger and access it. So those are 2 main thoroughfares, and neither of them at this time were deemed appropriate for further analysis.
Okay. Great, thanks.
I have a question, I guess, about like driver behavior of people with EVs, and I don't know if this is known, but obviously, most people are going to get their full charge at home, if possible. And presumably, no one's reliant on a public charger to get a substantial charge, because that takes time, and they'll want to do their shopping and go somewhere else. So like, how, in cities where there are more publicly available chargers, are they used? And the only experience I've had of this is living in Davis. We did have like a number of, in the Target parking lot, for example, EV spots that nobody used because they just charged at home. So I wonder if it's known what the utility would be.
I think the goal is to provide those chargers for tenants of multifamily buildings or large buildings that don't have an area of dedicated area to charge. For me, for example, I'm moving into a new building and it says that I am not allowed to run a plug from the building to the sidewalk. I understand why, because then the building would be liable for that cord across the sidewalk. So the thought is that someone who lives in a multifamily building would maybe go and find a fast charger where they could charge in under an hour or under 2 hours. And instead of relying on a plug overnight, they charge up at various locations throughout the week or month, depending on how much they're driving, and rely on that. We don't actually have data to support how often people are doing that in Albany.
Yeah.
I know, because I wasn't sure what the use case was, so thank you.
I'll just add briefly to that in a lot of cases, especially in this area, people are not actually driving that much on a daily or weekly basis. And so in lots of cases, people can actually recharge on one of these slower chargers pretty quickly because they're just not using up that much electricity. So again, similar use case with the multifamily charging in particular.
Perhaps in Davis, where folks are commuting long, long ways and go back to a more affordable single-family home. That's maybe why it's a different demographic of chargers.
Sure. Yeah, way more single-family homes, and there's also just fewer infrastructure concerns than we have here because it's less dense.
Right.
Thank you.
I was curious about the parking lots that I can think of that the city owns, like at the community center library, that parking lot, or City Hall here. Are there not opportunities at those sites?
I think at this time, it's a very complicated issue because it would require moving the parking spots, restriping. We'd have to assess the electrical capacity of all the buildings, which we don't have data for. And it would likely be a lot of time, materials, funding. And while we're not saying it's impossible in the long term, in the short term, it would be very challenging. And we're wondering if there are other opportunities for us to increase charging stations throughout the city that require less time, logistical analysis, and funding.
Okay, that's helpful. And then just one more is, there was the slide on single family and the sort of pros and cons of having someone run their own conduit, to the curb, that they can't control who parks there, and, et cetera. But I'm wondering if there's any willingness or interest to just allow that to happen with the, owner of the building agreeing to those conditions that, they're liable, that they can't always park there, et cetera, et cetera. I feel like I'm seeing people just do their own janky system where they just lay a thing across, and like that's subpar to like allowing it to be done right. And so I'm just wondering if they're like where the conversation is around that.
Yeah, I did some research on this a little while back. Berkeley actually recently did a pilot project allowing people to install not outlet boxes or conduit, but full chargers. And they ended up ending that pilot and not pursuing it further, mainly because it was very rare. Most people weren't interested because it was so expensive and they couldn't reserve it. And it required a very significant amount of staff time to do the permitting, especially because it can be very complicated with all of the infrastructure under the sidewalk. But that said, it is potentially something to look into. There are a couple of other cities that have started working on programs to allow people to run wires and do kind of ADA covers, but there's some, again, like it's not really that great of an ADA solution necessarily. So, there are a few cities that are trying to work on this. I think, again, it's an area of opportunity that does present challenges.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
If there are no other questions, I think we can move on to public comment.
Okay. If anyone would like to speak to this item, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature on Zoom. Nick Peterson?
Yeah, Nick Peterson with Albany Climate Action Coalition. So it's interesting to see, this is kind of a frustrating nut to crack. It's interesting to see that this is a real high priority for the city, but yet there aren't any simple ways to approach it. One thing I know, and we've talked about this before, there were 5 charge stations approved and we were going to put them in, and then there was a whole series of reasons. Were there any lessons? I guess one question that I have, are there any lessons learned from that? That, do we need to put more money into that? Do we need to, what are the issues that came up with that made it such a hurdle? And then the other thing I'm wondering is, can we lobby? I know El Cerrito in the plaza there, Tesla put in a bunch of superchargers. Couldn't there be, there's this big lot by Sprouts, including going all the way over to where the new graduate student housing is. There could be some Tesla superchargers located there. Is there a way to lobby entities to try to bring them to, to come to Albany and have those? I know Tesla is very, very, they want them in certain places where they get a lot of use and are close to freeways, but that seems like a good point. But anyway, those are 2 things I'm wondering about. The other thing is I having driven electric for the last 3 years and have 2 electric cars, the home charging really is the most and best. I mean, that's what makes it all worthwhile. I'm a little down on the idea of, putting this at gas stations. I'd rather see gas stations just go away and get replaced with, either housing or something else. We shouldn't be selling gas in the city. And, putting in a 1 or 2, if they could have a supercharger station there, that might be good. But again, the combination of high voltage and volatile fluids doesn't seem very smart. And it doesn't really, it seems like supercharging is better located in areas that have better services than a gas station has, where, there's some snacks and that's it. The best ones are located in, shopping centers where you can go get a cup of coffee or something like that. So I'm wondering if there's a way to bring in third parties and kind of do that, and to learn some lessons from our last attempt. If there's, does it mean we need to throw more money at it or whatever? Thank you very much.
Before I answer questions there, I want to see if any other members of the public would like to speak to this item. I'm seeing no hands raised. I can answer some of the questions that the public comment brought up. As far as lessons learned, we've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. Back in 2018, I want to say it was, city staff received a grant from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District to put in 5 chargers at various city-owned locations. The lessons learned was it was a small amount of money when we looked at how much the project was actually going to cost, and it was going to cost a lot because of all the challenges we mentioned in the previous slides with putting chargers in city-owned facilities. There were also a few turnover issues with the grant that also led to it falling through. But I think the main lesson learned was that money doesn't solve the logistical issues that are presented by putting chargers into city-owned facilities. Then as far as getting private entities to add chargers to lots, that's one of the things we're very excited to be looking into and hoping to bring the CAC in July, a proposed guide that we can give to developers and commercial business owners so that they have information about how to get those chargers in. So we'll make sure to keep the Tesla supercharger location, how am I trying to say this? We can't be specific about what brand we're going to endorse, but we'll make sure to paint a full picture of what's available. I believe those answered those two questions.
Okay, I think we can move on to discussion of this item. If there's anything.
I guess I have another follow-up question about bringing in private vendors to install their chargers. Do we have any insights as to, is there something they need that we need to provide to them? Is that the guide, and what goes in the guide?
The guide will be for owners of commercial spaces and give them information about how to seek or attract private charger companies. For example, the Sprouts lot put in the 2 Volta chargers, and that's just one of many private charging companies that will put in chargers in commercial lots and then have different fee structures for how they operate and who pays, et cetera, et cetera.
And there are also some potential incentive programs where if a commercial property owner wanted to pay to own chargers themselves and receive income from people using the chargers, they could do that too. So we're going to be looking into all those different opportunities.
We'll make them a book.
That's great. And then this is like way left field, but given that we have limited city land, we sublease some of something like Cerritos parking lot or a bit of the Sprouts parking lot or something, you know. There aren't actually very many parking lots in Albany.
No, there are not many.
Target parking lot, I don't know.
Not many parking lots in Albany, and I don't know that subleasing is a great financial move for the city, I would say.
More like, would you rather pave the way for them?
For them to do it themselves, right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, let's not pave the, let's unpave the way. Okay.
Uh-huh.
I had one comment. I want to say, thank you for that very comprehensive report. It was, eye-opening to see the different kind of small barriers that can stack up. And I really like the opportunity to basically plug data gaps or cross little barriers when they're also being presented in other opportunities. Like where you mentioned the solar and storage electrical capacity analysis, also having EV charging there. Or potential ideas like if there's ways, I don't know how this works in practice, but times where we know there's going to be street work on potential, utilities, kind of somehow making those opportunities known so that if are the entities that are interested in chargers that like, hey, this is your time to do it, that could reduce costs. So it seems like any of those kind of synergies with public works when they're going to construct things anyway, seems like, great ones to pursue to reduce costs and make opportunities available.
Mm-hmm.
Would anyone else like to add anything? Okay, if not, I think we can move on to the next item, which is presentation on electric heat pumps.
Great. Committee Member Melgen, would you like me to share your slides? Perfect. Give me one moment to pull those up. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, let me log back into Zoom for the 4th time. If anyone has a guide for me on how to operate Zoom. Not that I don't know how, it just likes to Okay. All right.
Okay, thank you. Uh, Heat pumps are a good way to reduce carbon emissions. I'm talking here about heat pumps for space heating. And compared to a forced air furnace burning natural gas, the CO2 savings are pretty significant. And there are two areas ongoing that may make it easier to promote heat pumps. One is the Inflation Reduction Act. It had an increase in the tax credit, and it had some rebates that'll be available maybe by the end of this year. I'll get back to that at the very last slide. But those both deal with the installation cost. Another situation is right now, given utility rates, heating your house with a heat pump actually costs more than just burning gas in a forced air furnace. But the PUC, pursuant to a state law, is revisiting PG&E's rate structure. And I'll get to that towards the end of this presentation. But first I wanted to go through what do the numbers look like. So I took a typical Albany house and calculated what the CO2 benefit would be from switching from a forced air furnace to an electric heat pump, and also what's the cost. And I put all the numbers in here in case you would like to do it, and in case you can tell me a better way to do it.
Committee Member Melgen, if you would like, if it would be easier for you to see your own slides, you could stand at the podium. Oh,
I have all mine
perfect.
here with my notes.
Okay, great. Just tell me when you'd like me to advance.
Okay, thank you. So next slide.
Okay.
So I basically went through this. For a typical Albany house, calculate the operating costs and the emissions. And then at the end, let's see, as Lizzie has told me already, we can't take any action on this at this meeting, like recommending something to the city council, because that was not agendized. But I do hope we'll have a good discussion at the end. Next slide, some basics. This is basic number one. Just in case there are people here who don't know what a BTU is, it's defined there. One thing threw off me when I got into this business, and that is that in the natural gas side, we use English units where M means 1,000. So MM means 1,000,000 BTU. And on the electric side, we use metric units where M means 1,000,000. So a megawatt hour is 1,000,000 watt hours. So you'll see MM here and M, they both mean 1,000,000. The other thing that has thrown people off, I've seen it a number of times, for electric energy, it's really easy to convert a kilowatt hour into a certain amount of heat, particularly 3412 BTU. But that is not a reversible reaction. My father-in-law, the electrical engineer, used to use the analogy of an egg. You can take a whole egg into a scrambled egg very easily, but you cannot, it's physically not possible to go the other way. This is like that. I've seen this, in fact, it's in the California Energy Commission regulations on cogeneration. This appears with an equal sign, and it's just flat wrong. It violates the second law of thermodynamics. Go to the next slide, please. By the way, this is pretty basic, so I'm going pretty fast. I hope that's okay. I'm not boring you to tears. This one here has the emission rates from burning natural gas, from getting a kilowatt hour out of a gas-fired power plant. Nothing new there. The next slide, please. Okay. The chart here shows the gas use by month, by PG&E billing period, actually, converted from therms into 1,000,000 BTUs, which is just shifting a decimal point. This house is probably about an average user of gas in Albany in all except maybe one respect. This house has an electric dryer, not a gas dryer, but it has a forced air furnace that burns natural gas. It's 1,800 square feet, reasonably well insulated, so probably about average, I would guess. I tried to estimate the gas use for space heating, in other words, for the winter, by assuming that the usage during the summer months, which is in this house for water heating and cooking, continued unchanged through the winter. So I just subtracted that amount. You can see the numbers in the last 0.5. So in this house, 23.4 million BTU per year approximately, at least for this winter, were burned for space heating. And then we'll have questions later on if this is not clear. The next question, next slide, well, that's how much gas was burned, but how much heat was actually delivered into the house? And I assumed a 90% efficient forced air furnace. So in other words, 10% is going up the stack, 90% is going into the house. That gives us 21.1 million BTUs per year delivered into the house to keep these people warm enough during the winter, winter. Next slide. This again is basics, number 3. It's not generally realized, I think, but creating heat is sometimes less efficient than moving heat. And in particular, moving heat from a cold area to a warm area just strikes a lot of people as so counterintuitive, but our refrigerators do it all the time. So to create heat, you see that arrow again, what kilowatt hour gives you 3412 BTU. With a heat pump, you can do 2 to 4 times better than that. The factor how much better is called the coefficient of performance. The coefficient of performance varies with the ambient air temperature that you're pulling the heat from, and also the desired temperature inside the house. But it's just obvious, intuitive, that if it's colder outside, it's harder to suck heat out of that air and put it into the house. So a colder climate has a lower coefficient of performance. Thanks to Michelle, she gave me a wonderful document, California Energy Codes and Standards. It's done by the CEC and a building standards group associated with the state. And with that, I was able to back into what they are assuming for the coefficient of performance for different climate zones. And most of the Bay, including Albany, they have, I infer that their coefficient of performance is 3.1, so that's what I used. From the same report, you can calculate the coefficient of performance for coastal communities in Southern California that have very mild winters, and there the coefficient of performance is 4.4, which makes sense because the outside air is pretty warm anyway, so it's easy to pull heat out. And from the same document, if you look at the climate zone east of the Sierras, where they have real winters, coefficient of performance is 2.5. So going back to that Albany house, it needs 21.1 million BTUs per year delivered into the house for space heating. If you do the math assuming a coefficient of performance of 3.1, you work out that you need about 2,000 kilowatt hours per year run through that heat pump in order to put that amount of heat from the outside ambient air delivered into the house. So this is the equivalence here. It's 2,000 kilowatt hours per year if we're using a heat pump, or it's 23.4 million BTUs if we're just burning gas in a forced air furnace. The next slide is, what does that mean in terms of carbon dioxide, carbon emissions? And this is just multiplying times the emission factors. For a gas furnace, it's about 1,200 kilograms per year for space heating for that particular winter. For a heat pump with electricity from non-carbon sources, well, non-carbon obviously is 0. By the way, I apologize for the typo there. It says 1.5 megawatt hours, but it should be 2.0. And then if the heat pump is using electricity from a gas-fired power plant, it's about 850 kilograms of carbon dioxide emitted to heat that house. It isn't shown here, but I buried in there some transmission losses. So the number is not quite the same as what you saw on a previous slide. And let me segue from this completely for a moment. There's been a lot of discussion about EVs here, and justly so. So just for the heck of it, I thought, well, how important is it to put a heat pump in a house in Albany, our climate zone, compared to getting rid of a gasoline-powered car and putting in an EV? And the answer I get really surprised me. Basically, one EV is about as good as 2 to 4 heat pumps. I was really surprised by that. Maybe you all knew that, but it was a surprise to me. So the costs, now I'm getting back to way at the beginning, I talked about the PUC proceeding to restructure PG&E's rates. For a gas furnace, that amount of gas, 23.4 million BTUs, the gas rate as of, I think, April, when I looked at my bill, was $21 per million BTU, or $2.10 per therm. So you get $500 roughly for 1 year. Electricity at the current rate to run the heat pump is $740. I think this is really unfortunate, because we would be telling people, put in a heat pump, it's great, it's more efficient, and oh, by the way, you're going to be losing money every winter. And to me, that's a hard nut to crack. And the legislature, bless their heart, understood that. They passed a law to order order the CPUC to revise PG&E's rates, to reduce the volumetric rate, the cents per kilowatt hour for delivery, and at the same time to impose an income graduated fixed charge. That's kind of like a mortgage payment. You pay it each month, whether you're on vacation in Tahiti or home, just doesn't matter, you pay that amount, and it would vary with household income. The proposals out there have a bottom tier for poor people, where the fixed monthly charge, in one case it would be zero, because PG&E would be getting money from the state's cap and trade program, where they sell allowances. In other proposals, the base rate for low-income people would be like $10 a month, $12 a month, stuff like that. For the upper income people, I've seen numbers as far as $90 a month. And I'm not following this really closely. Some of you maybe are, and you could provide me more data, more things that I don't know about, but that's what I've seen. And then one of the proposals that's out there would be to lower PG&E's charge for delivery from 22 cents that it is right now to 10 cents. And if the PUC were to do that, then at least we could tell people, if you adopt a heat pump, you're going to break even compared to what you would have spent by burning natural gas. That would be a good place to be. Obviously, it would be better if the PUC cut that even further, but 10 cents is one of the numbers that's kind of on the table. Let me back up from this just a second. All of what I'm talking about with the PUC is related to PG&E and the other investor-owned utilities and what they're charging for the use of their wires. The PUC has no rate-making authority over East Bay Community Energy, so that I put it here, it's that amount to them for energy, and what they charge is up to them. But the PUC is looking at the PG&E wires charge. So next steps. Here, I apologize, I got the bullets out of order, so let me start with the second one. The heat pump incentives under the Inflation Reduction Act, again, those have to do with buying and installing a heat pump, not the operating costs. But they're pretty good. There's a tax credit that is 30% of the upfront cost up to a maximum of $2,000, and that's been in place since January. And then the federal government is giving money to the states to set up rebates up to $8,000 for households that have a household income less than 150% of the median local household income. And it's up to the states to figure out how to implement that. I see a lot of nods here, so people are already aware of that, and that's a good thing. I'm sure you know more about it than I do. Anyway, so that will help a lot. For electricity, the PUC must reduce the rate for PG&E delivery and impose these income-based fixed charges by the middle of next year. And so what should the CAC do? I'll throw it open for discussion in just a minute, but one of the things we could do is, not at this meeting, but ask the city council to send a letter to the PUC supporting one of the particular proposals that's out there, or coming in after a proposed decision to say we love it or we hate it. Not really sure what to do. As far as the calculations here, I'd be happy to put them in a spreadsheet and let people use them, but I think it really makes sense to table that until after the PUC has acted on changing PG&E's wire charge. So thank you for your attention. I appreciate it.
Okay, any questions? Go ahead.
I had a question about, you had a minute there where you compared the cost of carbon savings of a new EV versus how many heat pumps. In that estimate, did you include embodied carbon of the new vehicle, of purchasing a new vehicle?
No.
Okay. And also, thank you. That's a really helpful presentation.
I'll just flesh that out a little bit. Compared to a gas furnace, the electricity from a non-carbon source is 0 kilograms, so you're saving 1,200 kilograms. And that's about how much you would emit by burning 150 gallons of gasoline that's 10% ethanol. So I just worked up from there and made some assumptions about how much the fossil-fueled, gasoline-fueled car would be driven and when it's replaced by an EV. So that's where that number comes from.
Yes, maybe a comment to follow up with that is just that connects a bit to, I think, what Lizzie was saying about in considering whether to upgrade the city's fleet, you have to think about, like, it costs a lot of carbon to build a new car, even a new EV. So I know we want to drive consumers in our town to make that consumption choice. Here's an opportunity where you're making a different choice with your dollars that has essentially no carbon cost to, it costs some materials to build a heat pump, but nothing like a new car. So how much energy do we want to put into being like, let's all buy new cars, and how much energy do we want to put into reducing the gas we're burning? Thank you for putting those two things side by side.
Also, thank you, Committee Member Melgen, for that presentation. I also want to say that it was great, and I don't want to get into too much discussion, but I just want to build on that note that it is something to consider when we're thinking through how to recommend council spending of the Measure DD funds and climate funds on, do we provide rebates for heat pumps as we've been doing? Do we increase that program? Do we increase the amount? Where do we want to put dollars to reduce the most carbon?
Any other questions? If not, I think we can move on to public comment.
Okay. I see we have at least one member of the public. Nick Peterson.
Yeah, again, thank you for a very thought-provoking presentation. That was quite interesting. I think one thing it does highlight is that fossil fuels are too cheap. And the reason they're cheap is their emissions are not taxed. There's no carbon tax, really. I mean, there's kind of cap and trade stuff. But in general, they're subsidized by the government. They're not covering for the harm they provide to the environment. And you could probably say the same thing about hydro-generated electricity. But as we know now, we're really backing into a very unhappy corner with the amount of emissions. The other thing I wanted to bring up about natural gas or methane is that leaks from the methane distribution systems and just from appliances, probably I've seen studies where the leaks that come out of that, because methane is such a very powerful heat trapping gas, probably account for more of heat trapping than the carbon emitted in burning the natural gas. And that comes from, the wells where they emit methane when they're trying to get the methane out of the ground, and all sorts of other, just transportation process and pipes and other things leak. So the whole negativity around fossil fuels, especially natural gas, have more to do with just that, you're going to have to pay a little bit more to get rid of that carbon. And I get a little nervous when we start prioritizing cost savings higher than trying to address carbon reduction. And it would be really nice if we could come up with some way to tax carbon, because that is the way to really make fossil fuels pay for the damage they're doing, and for people to be financially motivated to move to clean electricity. I've spent thousands and thousands of dollars, making my home more efficient and, as close to net zero as possible, and working through an expansion on a solar system. And, that's a decision I've made because I want to have a good conscience about how I impact the world. If people aren't willing to spend $250 a year more to reduce their carbon to zero, I think we're in a sad state. So again, I think those are issues we can't really do much about, but it would be nice if somehow we would try to get a tax on carbon.
Okay, if there are any other members of the public who would like to speak to this item, please raise your hand. No other hands raised.
Okay, I think we can move on to discussion of this item.
I have a couple comments. I guess first, thanks so much. It was a great presentation. I've heard a lot of presentations on heat pumps and fixed fees, and I always learn something. That was, not an exception. One thing I just want to make sure that folks picked up, which I think you said a couple of times, but when the presentation said that there would be lower rates, that is the unit rate that you're paying above this fixed fee, right? So I just want to make sure people understand that people's bills are not going down under these proposals. I mean, they are for low income because they'll have a smaller fixed fee and the same unit cost as everyone else. But for most customers, even though this will look like low rates, because you'll be paying, now it's 37 cents was in the slide deck, was the average price for a kilowatt hour of electricity. Now that unit price will look smaller. It'll look like 25 cents or something, but that'll be on top of a, let's say, $75 fixed fee. So that really changes the economics for a lot of things, not just for heat pumps, but all types of electrification and energy efficiency. Right now, there is a fee. If you go away to Aruba or whatever and you turn everything off in your home, you still have to pay something to PG&E. There's a minimum daily charge. But it's sort of eaten up. If you use electricity, then the minimum charge sort of goes away because you're paying PG&E a certain amount. But sort of to get to the point, a movement to a higher fixed charge and a lower variable charge is good for heat pumps. It's good for EVs because that fixed fee, it's like a sunk cost. You've paid it, and now you're just looking at the unit costs. But it can be bad for solar and for energy efficiency because the higher that unit cost is, the better your payback is on those other things, like a lot of energy efficiency, solar, those sorts of things. So if we're thinking about endorsing one of the proposals, and I've looked at all the proposals, I have a good presentation that someone else gave that I could share that goes through each proposal that was made, Sierra Club, BG&E, all of those folks. I just want to make sure that when we do that, that everyone understands those trade-offs, that if we're just looking at this for heat pumps, there are maybe unintended consequences for other energy measures, especially efficiency and solar. Thanks.
If I could interrupt, I think you could legally send that presentation you just mentioned to all of us, right, Lizzie? Would that,
Oh, you will? I think that should be fine. I'll double check. Who presented it? Okay. I'll double check I always check with the city clerk, because if there are things that are purely facts, fine. If there's any opinion in it, we can't share it. Got it. Do you know if there are opinions in it or recommendations in it?
It was a report done by a consultant
Mm-hmm.
to provide insight, but they weren't advocating for a particular.
Okay. If you send it to me once you get permission, I can always check things with the city clerk. Case by case, because I don't always know the answer.
and if I, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish.
I just, building on what Dan just said, it's worth looking at how these proposals would affect people in Albany. There are going to be winners and losers in terms of bills, and the people who are likely to lose are the people who right now live in kind of small, well-insulated homes. So they haven't been buying a whole lot of this expensive electricity, expensive per kilowatt hour. So the rate will go down, that'll help them some, but they'll be paying this whatever, $40, $60, $90 a month. So my guess is that quite a few people in Albany will see their electricity bills go up as a result of what the PUC is going to do, and go up a little bit if the PUC adopts what the solar industry was recommending, which is like a 2% cut in PG&E's wires charge, or go up maybe more than that. I'm not sure how many dollars per month if one of the more extreme proposals to really cut that rate and promote EVs, promote heat pumps. But it might be a heavy lift for the city council to support whatever the PUC does, because it's likely to hit us. Thank you.
I just had a clarifying question, because I'm realizing, as you two are talking, that I misunderstood. So the fixed charge being proposed is for electricity. Is there anything on the table concerning billing for gas and to disincentivize consumers from using gas?
Not that I'm aware of. Natural gas is included in California's cap and trade program, so that's adding a little bit to the cost of gas. But when I read one place where somebody said, well, why don't we take some of the fixed costs of wildfire prevention that are driving electricity rates so high and just collect that through the gas rate? I never saw any follow-up of that. I don't even know if it's illegal, so I don't know.
Thank you.
As Committee Member Malgin mentioned at the beginning, there's no action to take tonight, but if the committee wanted to continue this discussion and perhaps come up with a proposal for the City Council, that's something you all should discuss now if you wanted to come back. I'm seeing nods.
Can I ask staff a question? Mm-hmm. Do you work with other cities? Like, do you know if other cities are considering signing on to, like, the
Letter?
fixed fee?
That's a great question for us to ask our colleagues at EBCE for an upcoming MuniPals meeting. Maybe I'll put in a note to Kate and Alex.
My guess would be that if there was a specific proposal that EBCE was supporting, then maybe cities would all kind of sign on to that together. But I haven't heard of any cities specifically by themselves supporting one or another proposal.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you, Committee Member Melgen.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for doing all the math so that we don't have to.
Okay, I think we can move on to the next item, which is the climate literacy curriculum resolution proposal.
Before we do, there's only about 15 minutes left in the meeting, and I imagine we have more than 15 minutes of content. Does someone want to extend the meeting?
I'll move to extend the meeting 15 minutes.
So until 9:15? Okay.
Least I can do after talking so much.
I'll second that.
Okay. Committee Member Fasoon?
Yes.
Committee Member Hodges?
Yes.
Committee Member Lieberman?
Yes.
Vice Chair Melgen? Committee Member Vahil McClanahan?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes.
Great, motion carries. Would you like me to share your outline on the screen?
Sure.
All right. Feel free to start talking before I again have to sign into Zoom.
Okay, I can provide brief background. This was kind of like a follow-up from our last meeting when we discussed this a little bit, and we shared points of our outline. So the idea is to hopefully implement, like the end goal, the big picture thing is to implement a climate literacy resolution in our local district, AUSD. And this would basically, climate literacy is like required environmental education, and that stemmed from a background of Albany not having a history of environmental education implemented in their curriculum. So this was the kind of resolution draft thing we wrote up, and this kind of just outlines background, purpose, goals, and stuff like that. So we're primarily asking for feedback. This also has, stats and stuff too, so it is backed by science. So this is basically what we were thinking. We are looking at the EdSet, which stands for Environmental Design Society, English and Technology, which is a program at Albany High School. I was a part of that program. At Albany High, it's a 2-year environmental focus program where students are required to have internships that are supposed to be environmentally related instead of going to class on Fridays. And for example, that would be a perfect opportunity, and that would kind of be one of those mutually beneficial things because students need an internship for class. And for example, they could, go in and teach the younger students, and that would save a lot of money from like hiring someone to do it. So it would be mutually beneficial for the education and also for the high school students, especially since the timeline that we are looking at, there will be a new set of EdSet students. So, it would be great, kind of mutually beneficial thing. Curious to hear any feedback or edits or strong things that jump out or points that we maybe missed or didn't consider.
First, we'll take questions.
Oh yeah, questions, sorry.
One question I had related to what you just mentioned, kind of thinking about continuity of this program. So would it be kind of housed and administered by the EdSet, program after, you all graduate?
Yeah, we had that conversation. I just recently graduated, for example, so I'm not a part of AUSD anymore. You still are for another year. So we would, try to have as much collaboration with the EdSet program. And I don't see any issues with that, just because I know, from my own experience, that the students need internships, and a lot of them have done kind of similar work in the education realm. So I don't see any issues with, for example, students not taking up this role. And if not, there are climate/environmental justice clubs at the high school with the older kids and other related fields. So I would, that would kind of be the next step to fall back on, would be those students. And I'm sure that there's going to be a few that would want to do this, even if they aren't either in a club or a part of that set program. And especially in environmental science classes too, and teachers can help promote it and stuff like that. But yeah, continuity was important while we wrote this out. Any other questions?
Yeah, we're new to the district, but I have one of my children's a first grader, and she's got a teacher who's quite good at teaching them climate topics. So the question is sort of, to what extent have you reached out so far to the elementary level educators, and what have you heard back from them? And is there baked into this a plan for collaborating with teachers?
We have not talked to teachers yet. It has primarily been parents of teachers in that. So we have had conversations with parents who had elementary school students and middle school students. And the kind of next step was to talk to the actual teachers, because it would require, obviously the teachers would have to be on board and supportive and kind of work with their own class schedule and their course plan. So we are going to talk to teachers, but so far it's kind of been primarily rooted in parents and what the parents have heard from the kids about what they're learning in school and what they aren't learning, and kind of that.
Any other questions?
One question I had there, just to confirm, would the kind of target audience of those being in the classes then be both elementary and middle school students?
Yeah, we would start with elementary school, and our goal is to then kind of use that as a pilot and then move to Albany Middle School.
Okay, great. And then, one process question I had. I guess what's the, what does a resolution do or kind of enable once you, get that approved?
It lets us make the program and get it enacted into action. So we have the okay, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of just we need the green flag to go, and then we can start kind of actually working with teachers to implement this, and it's a written out thing and not just a students trying to do X, Y, Z.
Okay, great.
Another question. So presumably in EdSet, if someone is doing their internship in a workplace, then they're being supervised by the workplace supervisor. Who supervises them if they're doing
The teacher in the classroom. So what we kind of envisioned was it would look like the teacher would still be in the classroom with the students, but kind of off to the side, and the students would kind of take the lead on sessions, but the staff would be there to supervise.
If there are no other questions, I think we can move on to public comment.
If any members of the public would like to speak to this item, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature on Zoom. Our first public speaker is Lucinda Young.
Yes, thank you. I think this is a great proposal. The New York Times just last week, just a few days ago, had an excellent article about the importance of climate education, and noted that currently only one state in the United States, New Jersey, is the only state that requires climate education, and that there is a great need for an expansion. So I think this is great in the absence of a California mandate. I think it's great. I am a little confused. Would this be, we're asking the city council to make a resolution and to this, because ultimately this would be a school district decision whether to implement this. So would the city will we be asking the city council to make a recommendation to the school district? I was a little unclear about how this would work. But I fully support climate education. I think there's an important need for it. And I can remember recently reading an article that the most effective way to reach parents and educate parents about the importance, about the climate crisis, was through the children. Great job, and I hope this is able to come to fruition. And I think it would also be good. It looks like this is just a recommendation, and I think it should be a mandate, not just a recommendation, but actually a mandated curriculum. Thank you.
Can I answer that question? Or
Let's
should I
do
wait?
we'll do the second public comment and then we'll answer all questions. Nick Peterson?
Yeah, so I concur with the previous public speaker's statement or interest in getting clarification on that. Although I see, to me, it kind of seems like because we had the Climate Action Committee has members from the school on board and that were appointed by the school board, or at least one of them was. It is, it's kind of a way of us having some input or some cross-pollination, if you will, of ideas that we're both chasing down. So one thing I kind of hope is that this is an opportunity to push for more collaboration between the school and the city and the school district. I mean, I don't think we're asking the city council to tell the school to do this, but we could ask the city council to concur with our student members that this is a good idea, in sort of a friendly recommendation or something like that. And I really think there's an opportunity here following on with, the impact of, one of the big, great things about Albany as a community is our school district. And a lot of our community comes together through the schools. So if we've talked, I know the Climate Action Committee has talked at quite a bit of length in the past about how can we capture that energy, the youth energy, and support students and get them to help get the word out about climate change and information to their parents and get their parents more involved. So if there's some way that the Climate Action Committee can make a recommendation to City Council to support this or do a friendly letter to the school board, I'm sure that the school district has their curriculum development people in their administration, and they'll have to play in on this also. But it certainly would be encouraging to get some kind of communication going, and that we would be interested in supporting them with information or whatever. So I see a lot of opportunity here, and maybe some future partnership or collaboration between the city and the school. Thank you very much.
There are no other members of the public with their hand raised. If you'd like to answer those questions.
Yeah, so for the first speaker, we were kind of primarily focused on delivering this directly to the school district, not city council, but kind of also following up with that, as was just kind of mentioned, it would be very helpful to have that support from the city council, or to have like a friendly letter, as was mentioned. So we will look into that. And I'm not exactly too sure personally the process of how that works. If there has to be some kind of, I don't really know the process of that.
I don't either, but I'll look into it.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know how to get like a kind of letter of support or a whatever kind of similar thing from the city council, but that would, I think, benefit a lot. But this will be primarily focused within the board and not the city council, because it is like or within the district, because it's not a city council focused effort.
I'll follow up with the city clerk next week and get back to you, and then we can bring it back for discussion. If it were to go to the city council, it would have to come back to the CAC in July or sorry, not August, because we're on recess and so is council. But July, and then would go to council in September, or come back to the committee in September and go to the council in October.
Okay.
But I'll get the specifics about if that's possible, and if yes, how so.
Yeah, like how that process goes, if they have to vote on, I don't know. Okay.
They would have to vote to recommend it. But
Okay.
Okay, so we can move on to discussion of this item. Any comments?
Is it outlined in the proposal, the process for developing the curriculum that will be taught?
Yes, there is. It's on the second page. I was actually gonna say, like, if you guys have any recommendations or anything to change, because it's kind of not a concrete idea. It's kind of vague topics. So we would like to specify it a little bit more.
I think it's going to get pulled up on the screen in a second.
Okay, thanks.
just logging back into.
And I can also kind of describe like how we went about picking these topics. I don't remember them off the top of my head. So, okay, so these were kind of just like what we want to talk about. So like endangered species and, you know, weather, and kind of also like talking about, we wanted to focus on or include like aspects of how environmental problems disproportionately affect communities. So that was where we see socioeconomic concerns. We wanted to include that for sure. Especially, yeah, like poverty and marginalized populations, and also like focusing on how it affects humans, because I think like a lot of the time for kids, it's kind of just like, oh yeah, like the poor polar bears, and that's really sad, but I don't live in Antarctica, so boohoo. It's really sad though. But like really talking about like its effect on humans and how it doesn't just affect what media portrays climate change as being. So yeah, also we're very, you know, if you have a topic you see here that you really think is missing or shouldn't be talked about or kind of anything of that sort, we would love to hear it while we continue to think about these more in depth.
I like the emphasis on impacts to humans. I think that's very motivating. I asked a 10-year-old what her thoughts were on this. And she said often at school when they talk about climate, they send you home with something to tell your parents to do. Go tell your parents to do this. And what she would like very much to hear in her school is, what can I personally do? Both now and in the longer term. So just as an opinion to share, I guess I would love to see any one of those topics presented through that lens, like so that children come away feeling honestly more empowered than most of us adults feel right now to make changes and to know that those changes aren't always consumption changes. It's not just buying a different product. There's a lot of different actions we can take.
Yeah.
You guys for putting so much into this. This is, it can be very hard to figure out how to make change in schools in particular, and I think this is a well thought through idea. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, the point you bring up is really important, especially how, yeah, it is taught that, oh, you know, let's just tell my mom to, you know, we can't ever use plastic products in our house ever again. We're all going to be vegan and we're going to change the world that way. And like, obviously that's great, you know, it helps, but, you know, kind of talking about the bigger picture to it, that, you know, it is also, we want to not create climate anxiety for an 8-year-old who's like, if I eat chicken ever, I'm going to, you know, ruin the world and everything's going to be awful and they're going to constantly be stressed about every single decision they make. And we want to say like, yeah, you know, it's great to have alternatives to certain things, but like think bigger, think past that, think here is the root of the issue and here's how I can be my own climate advocate. you know, at whatever the age they are, and like how they can do other actions, and whether that starts out by understanding the importance of separating trash when they're young, and then that kind of grows up to more concrete, and by the time they're in high school they understand the effects of like voting and policy and kind of the more intricate details of how to take, you know, steps towards a more sustainable daily lifestyle for themselves and for their families. But yeah, it's a really cool thing to bring up, and we're definitely going to focus on that throughout this.
Yeah, we want to emphasize that the main goal of this is also to bring a realistic point. Because, like, we don't, like, first of all, we don't want to make it, like, super scary or anything like that, but we also want to be more realistic in our solutions and stuff like that. And that's one of the things we highlighted in the socioeconomic concerns. So, yeah, it is a big priority for us, just, like, to list solutions, probably maybe at the end of each topic or something like that. Yeah.
I really appreciate this. Is a great, you know, you've thought this through really well. One thing that one of the public commenters mentioned was that there's at least one state that has required that there is curriculum, New Jersey. I don't know if there are any other states, but maybe as you're looking to develop the curriculum, you could see what has been developed in New Jersey and use that as a starting point. I know it's very difficult to develop curriculum. It's hard to make it engaging. It's hard to figure out the scope. And so if it's been done in one state, might not be what you're looking for, but it's always good to sort of have a reference point.
All right, anything else?
I have one quick question. What do you think your timeline is for bringing this back to the committee? Do you think it would be next month? Would it be, okay. Great.
If there's nothing else, I think we can move on to subcommittee updates.
Yes, and we just have 2 slots for subcommittee updates from the Environmental Justice Subcommittee and the Zero Emissions Transportation Subcommittee, since other subcommittees had full agenda items. One note I already provided to the Zero Emissions Transportation Subcommittee, but want to let everybody know, is that tomorrow evening the Transportation Commission has an agendized discussion of whether or not they will form a subcommittee to work with our subcommittee of the CAC. So if any members of this committee would like to attend the Transportation Commission meeting to speak on that item, you're more than welcome to do so. My normal spiel as a member of the public, not as a representative of the CAC. So just make sure to say something along the lines of, I'm speaking on behalf of myself, not as a representative of the CAC.
I can go for the Environmental Justice Subcommittee too. So we are kind of still brainstorming what we want to kind of do our project on. I came back recently from Capitol Hill Ocean Week, which was, they did like kind of, it was a week at Capitol Hill and that focused on like ocean and climate stuff. And I had really great conversations with people there who were like professionals in the field of environmental justice and environmental policy. And some ideas they threw around and kind of we discussed that could be kind of scaled at a local level was like organizing around Justice 40 from the Biden administration and also doing some kind of like sort of tying into education, but having people come in and talk, like kind of like a panel session-ish for high school students, which would kind of tie into climate literacy, like the topic of educating local youth, but we're still kind of thinking about how we would go about that. But potentially doing some kind of policy work with Justice 40, collaborating with the Environmental Justice Club at Albany High School, and I know the president of that club, so there could be some kind of pathway to work with them, but we're still kind of brainstorming because a lot of our work went into the other, the proposal.
You need an update from the Zero Emissions Transportation Committee?
If you have one, you don't have to provide an update.
Yeah,
but-
we didn't meet. We had a meeting scheduled and with a couple members of the Transportation Committee, and at the very last minute, they were unable to attend, so we did not meet.
No problem. Also, I hope everyone knows that this is just a standing item. You don't have to report back. Subcommittees are whatever you want to make of them. So don't feel like it's like a assignment you have to report back on every month. You can say no update.
Yeah, I can add a small update too. Yeah, still planning to reach out to Richmond Transportation Department to kind of learn their kind of successful installs of EV chargers in right-of-ways. I guess, yeah, in light of the information we heard tonight, it sounds like it, well, at least it gives us a few more good kind of items to ask directly to Richmond how they tackled those particular things, because I'm sure they probably face some of the same things. And also, I guess, yeah, I think it'll be good for this transportation, yeah, our subcommittee, because we've had EV charging as one of our top items, to really digest everything y'all presented tonight and see if there's anything we can kind of reorient our focuses that could like chip away at some of those barriers. So I think we have some good information to take back and work with over the next month.
Okay, before we proceed, I think we're kind of nearing our end of the meeting, so if there are any motions to extend the meeting.
We have much else on the agenda?
We do have to take public comment on this item and future agenda items, so I would factor in, to be safe, a minimum of a 10-minute extension.
I would like to offer a motion that we extend by 10 minutes.
So to 9:25?
Yes.
Okay.
Seconded.
Okay. Committee Member Fasoon?
Yes.
Committee Member Hodges?
Yes.
Committee Member Lieberman?
Yes.
Vice Chair Melgen?
Yes.
Committee Member Vahil McClanahan?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So are there any questions? And if not, then we can move on to public comment.
If any members of the public would like to speak to this item, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised.
Okay, we can move on to discussion of the updates, but there's not really updates, so. We can move on to future agenda items. So are there any requests for future agenda items?
So I have three things I'd like to talk about, and I'm still getting my head around the workflow and how to present things as an action. So I'm not actually sure if any of these constitutes an agenda item. Maybe you guys can help me. The first two have to do with our work plan. I would be interested to receive, or just be pointed to if it already exists, an update on where we're at with the work plan for this committee, which ends at the end of this month. So like what got done, what didn't get done, what we still hope to do.
Yes.
So that's one request. And then the second request is setting aside time to develop the new work plan. Does this committee do that, or do you do that and give it to us, or? That's the second thing. And then the third one is, I would love to explore more sort of the delineation of our different responsibilities, because we're the climate committee. We can't execute the climate plan in full without collaboration from all the other committees. And I know we're beginning to develop a bit of a subcommittee meetup kind of thing. And I think there's a lot more maybe we could do to say, formally, this committee executes this part of the climate plan, for example. Those are all three things I'd love to work on. I don't know if any of them is properly an agenda item.
Yeah, I can answer a couple of those. So the first part, an update on where the work plan stands. I'm blanking on the date, but we brought a track changed, redlined version of the work plan to the committee. I cannot remember, when. But I will find that for you and I'll send it to you and I can circulate it to everybody. But it basically gave an update, I think it was about a year to a year and a half ago, on what the committee had worked on, what they'd accomplished, and where we are at. I think it might have been before this new committee sat, so during the last cycle. As far as the work plan, the city council hasn't yet determined how they want to approach work planning for committees. They direct us for how to do a work plan. They have not yet determined themselves, so therefore haven't provided direction on how to do that. So there's no upcoming agenda item on work planning because we wouldn't do it before they directed us on how to do it. But once we have a better idea of how to approach that, based on their direction, there will be a discussion item dedicated to that. In the meantime, if you're looking for a work plan direction, you can still reference the old work plan. I think a lot of the items are still very relevant. And then also, of course, the climate action and adaptation plan. And to answer your last question about which committees implement each one, I think the council as a whole oversees implementation of the climate action and adaptation plan. This advisory body advises the council on different policies aimed at implementing that plan. There are certain items that are specific to a certain committee or commission's purview, like for example, the street tree management plan. While it's an action item from the climate action plan, the Park, Rec, and Open Space Commission has been given council designated authority to oversee management of trees. So they're the commission that would oversee implementation of that item. I guess all this is to say there's no committee that directly is like responsible for the cap because it's a citywide document. It's the council that's overseeing overall implementation, and then as actions get implemented, different bodies are responsible for them based on their purview. Similar to the general plan, I would give. The general plan is a general guiding document for the whole city. Overall, council oversees it. The Planning and Zoning Commission is often getting updates on the general plan, but there are certain items like tonight, the parking policy that came to this committee because it touched on the committee's purview for assessing how parking policies influence greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you. That's all very helpful for me. I feel like for that third part, there's more to think about, but I also think that if everyone else is really super clear on which parts we do and which parts we don't do, then I don't want to take up collective time on that question. So maybe, oh my gosh, we're almost out of time. Are others unclear on which parts we do and don't advise on, or is that pretty for everyone?
So a cap implementation, I'll think this through.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so I guess that's a request for an agenda item, is maybe further delineation or exploration of where we do and don't advise on the climate action plan, or how we augment other committees' efforts.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have another possible item, which is, as we're meeting, the EBCE board is meeting or met to approve the budget for the next fiscal year, among other things. And there's some outcomes there that would impact customers in Albany. And I thought maybe if people are interested, I could do a very short update on that. If there's another way to do it, not as a formal agendized item or whatever, that's fine. But I thought, the effective price of Renewable 100 is probably much lower. There'll be dividends for customers and more renewable energy content for customers on Bright Choice and that sort of thing were the proposals. And I don't know where it panned out, but be happy to, if people think that's relevant. And then also I've been working on a incentive finder tool that I know was presented to the Muni Pals, a way for people in Albany and other local communities to find federal, state, and local incentives around energy, electric transportation, heat pumps, that sort of thing. And I'm hoping it's at a point where it could be presented publicly in a month. But I thought maybe that sort of thing might also be of interest.
Are folks interested in that? I saw some head nods, but just. Okay, we can chat through agendizing that.
Okay, I would keep it very brief, I promise.
No worries.
Okay, anything else?
We do have a member of the public with their hand raised.
Okay, then I believe we can move on to public comment.
Nick Peterson?
Yeah, I had a couple things. I was disappointed to see that the point of listing mandate, or the point of, I guess it was unfortunately still called the point of sale mandate subcommittee, has kind of evaporated. Please bring that back. I think a point of listing requirement that incentivizes property sellers, buyers to make appropriate energy efficiency and electrification upgrades within a reasonable time of transferring of property ownership is a first step to transitioning to approach to existing properties and how to get them to comply with the CAP goals. Eventually, we're going to have to ratchet that up and really on people to move ahead. I mean, incentives can only go so far. You can't bank on incentives for everything. And then just to back up what someone else had mentioned about implementing CAP goals. How are CAP goals implemented throughout the various city departments? An example of this is, of course, the police department has in the past 2 years about 3 more gas guzzling fossil fuel powered vehicles. They look no different than any other in the middle of the country. They're the big Ford SUVs. Doesn't represent what Albany is or where we're headed or anything. And it seems like there should, every department in the city should, when they think about doing something or buying something, relate back to the climate action and adaptation plan goals. And it doesn't seem like that's fully happening. It's unclear to me as a member of the public how the city is approaching that, and how it doesn't just get stovepipes and people sort of blow it off as, well, we can't really do that. I think there should be a requirement that they explain and research and come up with information on how that's done. And then a final thing is, it'd be good to see the Climate Action Committee recommend forming some kind of outreach service in partnership with third party, maybe Switches On, Bayren, or others, to reach out and engage low and fixed income homeowners to make phased upgrades accommodating their budget and state of current appliances and electrical capacity. I think this is really something that will be of value, especially underrepresented and senior property owners in Albany who aren't really going to the website and seeing that. We're just going to have to really reach out and engage them. So maybe something on targeted outreach to the more underserved members of our community. Thank you.
Lucinda Young.
Yes, I have, actually, let's see, 3 future agenda items. The first 2, I want to just echo what the previous speaker, Nick Peterson, mentioned. I think it's the point of listing mandate, which had been presented, I believe, last year. I remember hearing the presentation on it. There's I think that needs to be explored, or some other alternative to reach the existing inventory of homes. The heat pump rebates are not going to be enough to, I mean, they're great, but they're not going to be enough to make the transition of from gas to electric that is desperately needed. And second, the previous speakers concern expressed, I share those, that the CAP goals need to be a priority in every decision that our city makes, not just decisions from the Climate Action Committee, but every decision by every committee it needs to be made with the CAP goals in mind. And third, I think it was about 2 meetings ago, presentation or discussion was made about the single-use plastic reduction ordinance. And I understand that Alameda County has issued a model ordinance. And I believe, my understanding was that was coming down the pike or is under consideration. I haven't heard anything more about that, so I just wanted to echo my support for that. And I'm hoping that we will be hearing about that in the near future. Thank you.
No other members of the public with their hand raised?
Okay, I think it's time. Let's go ahead and adjourn. Our next meeting will be July 19th.
Okay,